Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for your patience starting a couple minutes late here. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mark Davis, who's the president and CEO of Pennsylvania Advocacy and Resources for Autism and Intellectual Disability. A few things logistically before we start. One, we are recording today's webinar, so we'll have a link to that recording for everybody who RSVP'd after we're done. Two, if you have questions, there are two different ways you can ask questions. One is in the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a box there for questions. You can type those questions in at any point during the presentations, and we will read those questions out at the end after our speakers give their introductory remarks. The other way you can ask a question is you can click the raise your hand button. You go into a queue, and when we get to Q&A at the end, we'll also have some time set aside to unmute folks one at a time in that queue so you can ask your question out loud if you'd rather do that. We'll remind you at the end how you can do that. So like I said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mark in just a second, but let me just quickly introduce the folks who will be speaking on today's call. So besides Mark, we have Tim Pearl, who is the COO of Fayette Resources. We have Marie Mambuka, who is a parent. She lives in Allegheny County. We have Gina O'Neill, who is a DSP for Lakeshore Community Services in Erie. We have Patrick D'Amico, who is the Executive Director of the Provider Alliance. We have Michael Donovan, who is at the Alliance of Community Service Providers. We have Diane O'Rourke, who is CEO of the ARC of Mercer County, and Richard Edley, who is the president and CEO of RCPA. So let me turn the floor over to Mark to kick things off. And like I said, we'll take questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for all the media and other interested folks who have joined us this afternoon for the call. We've got about 200 people on the call, so I think that really clearly indicates there's a lot of people who share our concerns for our community-based system of care and its ongoing viability. So we appreciate you joining us today and hope that you help give voice to our concerns with your legislators and with the governor's office, and let them know that we need COVID-19 relief funding, and we need it now. That we're running out of staff, we're running out of the availability of PPE, we're running out of money, and we're running out of time. And that needs to be a consistent drumbeat from us to our elected officials. We've had going on upwards of 4,000 contacts made over the last couple of days, 3 days, with elected officials, and we'd like to see that continue and to continue to get stronger. Just going to talk about a couple of things to start this off, and basically about surveys. We did two surveys that we participated in, and a number of folks on the phone did too. One was a survey by our national organization, Anchor, which resulted in almost 700 providers responding from all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam. They employed nearly 250,000, about 240 plus, almost 250,000 direct support professionals, DSPs, and that survey data came in on April 10th, so a little bit over about a month ago. So it's really relevant and current data. What that survey found was that on average, providers of IDA services had 1.2 months cash on hand, 1.2 months, and that only 55% of the organizations responding, 45% were able to operate beyond the threshold, and 55% were not able to operate beyond a month, 1.2 months, given the additional expenses that they were incurring. Some of the additional expenses are $44,000. This is the Anchor survey. $44,000 average monthly related to training and onboarding costs. We had $77,000 related to overtime during the crisis, and we had $28,000 in monthly expenses for personal protective equipment, PPE, cleaning supplies, those kind of things. So these are real expensive. They're expenses. They're significant expenses, and they're expenses that aren't budgeted. Typically, our margins are very thin. We've got about a 1% margin if we're lucky, and we have a single payer. So 99 to 100% of our reimbursement comes from Medicaid, Those Medicaid dollars are determined by the state and the federal government, predominantly the state. And unless we get additional funding from the state, we have some providers that are really at risk of no longer being able to operate. And we're wondering what's going to happen to those folks, because we think it's going to be actually more expensive to the state after that. The other survey that we did was we looked at providers in Pennsylvania. We had 69 providers from the state of Pennsylvania representing over $1.83 billion in services and employing 31,671 direct support professionals. So again, a really good sample size. We found that the financial impact on providers of lost revenue and additional expenses to be 27.9% of their revenue. So just shy of 28% of the revenue is the impact. And the cash on hand, so the amount of money that providers have in the bank to meet additional expenses, which again are almost 28%, and lost revenue and expenses, was 2.9 days. So less than 3 days of cash on hand. Obviously, extremely precarious position. We're very worried about the future of our community system. And just to share a little bit about what a direct support professional is, how family members' concerns and other provider concerns, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Tim. Tim, you want to take over?
Thank you, Mark. Just want to give a quick background on what Fayette Resources is. Fayette Resources opened in 1991. It was opened by our current CEO, Kathy Morris. We serve over 400 consumers in various services, but mainly it's residential. We have over 105 group homes spread across Western Pennsylvania, all the way from Uniontown and Fayette County up to Du Bois and Clearfield County. We also have over 800 employees, most of which obviously are direct support professionals. So far to date, we've been extremely fortunate here at Fayette Resources. We've only had one staff in our 105 group homes and our 800 employees that have tested positive. That staff is currently recovering right now. She's been off work for about 4 weeks right now. And we're highly anticipating her return back to work, but she's been able to recover at home. One of the biggest impacts this has had, other than our residential services, is the impact it's had on our community services. We have 5 hubs where we run community participation services out of that we've had closed since the end of March when this all came down. To date, that's resulted in a loss of revenue of over $400,000. And it's also impacted the budget for our residential services as well. Now we need to provide staff in our homes for our consumers who are not going to their community services right now. And it's also had an impact on our community families. We have a lot of families that live out in the community who send their loved ones to our hubs, and they've lost their access to community services right now. For us, the financial impact has been rather large. To date, we've spent well over $700,000 on the virus so far. That is including increased staffing costs, not only overtime, but we did decide, notwithstanding the loss that we've already seen, to provide an incentive payment to our staff during this time period, because they're dealing with a lot right now out there as well. Other expenses include mitigation expenses, keeping our houses clean, also trying to secure PPE, which we have been able to do to some extent, but we're very concerned about moving forward, the availability of the PPE. And moving forward, we're also very concerned about the increased cost for supplies and food. Those things seem to be skyrocketing at the supermarkets right now. And also concerned about the impact that all of this is going to have on the state budget next year and how that's going to affect our rates. The consumer's been doing very well during this time. You know, a lot of the people that we serve don't have the ability to comprehend what's been going on. And it's led to a struggle for a lot of our staff, but they've been getting through it. You know, our consumers, they've lost a lot of their community services right now, a lot of their community activities, and they haven't been getting visits from their loved ones. We have restricted visits right now, and that's the same for the families. The families are impacted by that as well. But our staff have been doing great, as I said, through all this. We've had 6 consumers that were showing symptoms, so they were sent for tests, and we've had a lot of staff volunteer to stay and work with those consumers until the test results came back, trying to mitigate exposure to other staff. So they've really been stepping up through all this. So just in conclusion here, I'd like to thank PAR for leading the advocacy effort here and encourage everybody else to support that in the state of Pennsylvania. I'd also like to send a big thank you not only to our staff, but to all the staff across the state of Pennsylvania for what they're going through right now and the way they are stepping up to the plate. And at this point, I'll just turn it over to Marie.
Hello. Hi. My name is Marie Mambuka. I'm the mother of a 29-year-old man with autism and intellectual disabilities. Tony has been living in a group home for a few years now. I'm the luckiest woman. My son is being so well cared for by Envisions Human Services. Is the agency that directs support professionals are irreplaceable. And then just talking to the other people on this, the people who work in this field are absolutely amazing. COVID has impacted Tony. My son likes to go to the gym every day and walk around the mall every day. He's quite an exercise freak because we like to eat. So he's lost both of those activities. It's been really hard. He has a treadmill in his house and they've taken to walking around the neighborhood. He will keep a mask on, but it was really challenging initially. Tony and I, he's more verbal than most. I'm pretty blessed, but he's not real chatty. So he does call me here and there on the phone, but we're not able to stay as connected as we were before this. I'm not able to go over there and visit. I haven't hugged or kissed him since March 10th, and that's really painful. The direct support professionals, when this first hit, like I got laid off on March 10th, and so then we all just stayed in. We figured out a way how we're going to explain to Tony what was going on using his limited language and limited understanding, and just repeat. We made up social stories for him to understand about social distancing, and I believe he gets it, but he just needs to have it repeated every day. The fears I have are that the direct support professionals that take care of my beautiful boy are going to get ill, and that just scares the heck out of me. I'm scared my son will get sick. It's a very scary time. I've always advocated for the professionals who work with my child. Having a child and an adult with autism and intellectual disabilities is very challenging. It was really tough raising him and raising my daughter, and transitioning to this group home has been a miracle, having this opportunity for my son. So I do need the government to continue these services, to increase the monies during this time. I didn't think about all those extra costs that Mark and Tom just mentioned, Tim, pardon me, with this COVID, that it's terrifying. And so I do hope that the governor increases the budget for now and increases the budget for all the other beautiful adults coming who will need a place. And I would also just like to throw in, I would love the direct support professionals to be paid a living wage, to respect how essential they are, and essential for 40 years. I would love for my son to have these same 3 women be with him in his life till the end of his life, because they care about him and he cares about them. And so thank you very much for letting me participate. I'll give it to Gina.
Thanks, Marie. I'm Gina. I am a DSP for Lakeshore Community Services. I work out of our Erie Warren office. I've been with Lakeshore for about 7 years now. Things have changed a lot since COVID. With staffing, we've always had a difficult time staffing. Lots of hours, lots of same employees. The job can be very stressful at times prior to COVID, and now that we're dealing with this epidemic, things have changed drastically and very fast. Our consumers were used to socializing and being out gathering with their friends and their family and their day-to-day routines, and everything stopped. And so it's very confusing for them, and they don't quite, understand what's happening. And you do your best to explain the situation to them without, we don't want to put fear into them or worry them for any reason. But it is scary because we're running around with our masks on, and that, creates a language barrier. So sometimes they have a hard time hearing what we're saying, and that stresses them out. So there's a lot of different variations. And I myself am currently, I think tonight will be, I'm a third shift worker. I think tonight will be my 46th day in a row. I work anywhere from 56 to 60 hours a week. I take more if I'm needed. I love my job. I love my people. I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. But it is difficult. You walk in the door and you sanitize and you get your mask on and you take your temp and, do all the steps to make sure you're being safe, you're keeping them safe. My one lady, every night she asks me, are you wearing that mask so you can keep me safe? And I tell her, absolutely, I'm keeping you safe and I'm keeping me safe. So it is a difficult time. Like I said, we're doing the best we can to keep everybody safe. We take inventory twice a week and turn that in so that we can stay ahead of everything, because things are hard to get. It is limited supplies on toiletries and food. So we're constantly taking inventory so that we make sure we don't run out of things for our consumers. And that can be difficult times too, because you go to the store and there is nothing, and that panic kind of sets in. So we're doing the best we can also to stay on top of that. Like I said, it's all very difficult. There's I could just go on and on about all the different things our consumers are going through because of their change in routine. A lot of them are used to going on, rides to see horses, and because we're staying in the homes, they can't do that, so they get frustrated and they're having more behaviors because of it, which is stressful for them and stressful for us. Just even trying to get them to the doctors is difficult, because you call and you leave a message and you wait for them to call back, and it's a lot of phone tag, and that that can be difficult at times too. So as a DSP, it's very difficult, and we're just going to keep trucking on and keep going through and doing the best we can. So with that, I'm going to give it to Patrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Patrick D'Amico, and I'm from the Provider Alliance. We are an IDA provider association, and all of our members provide services somewhere in Western Pennsylvania. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the IDA community system was already struggling with its capacity to serve people. The high demands of being a direct support professional, coupled with historically low wages, had already created a workforce crisis. The IDA associations across Pennsylvania engaged a compensation study last year that was published in January, reflecting an average DSP wage of $13.20 an hour. Not surprisingly, only 80% of needed positions were filled, and the survey reported a 32% turnover rate. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic. People with severe disabilities experiencing serious disruption and trauma in their lives. People separated from their families, their jobs, their friends, their activities, and their support systems. DSPs with children out of school and with no daycare to support them while they work. DSPs with health conditions that pose serious threats for themselves or for those within their own families. In both lost revenue and increased expenses for COVID-19, it is costing our service system millions of dollars that we do not have. There is no private sector option. IDA is a single payer system, and the state sets the rate for every service on the fee schedule. The IDA service system cannot downsize. All of the people in it still need to receive services. Governor Wolf and our legislators in the PA House and Senate must take action now, or the IDA service system is in danger of exceeding its capacity, which will have a catastrophic effect on the individuals supported, their families, and the people devoted to their care. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate your help in communicating this message. I will now turn the mic over to Michael Donovan. Thank you.
Let's go to Richard real quick because I think Michael's having some technical difficulties. Is that all right, Richard? Can you jump in?
If I'm jumping in, am I on the camera?
Your camera was it's on for a minute. Looks dark. We can hear you though. There we are.
There we
There you
go.
go.
Okay, it's good to have technical difficulties. Well, I am Richard Edley, President and CEO of RCPA, the Rehabilitation and Community Providers Association, and we represent about 360 agencies and facilities throughout the Commonwealth. And what you're hearing about today, obviously, is the crisis, and it's a medical crisis. And given that, when we turn on the TV and we look at all the numbers, we talk about medical care. We talk about emergency rooms and emergency departments and ventilators and hospitalizations, and we get that. That's where the conversation should be. But what does happen is that people overlook and forget about the impact on the totality of health and human services. We tend to understand medical care, and we understand right away the devastating impact COVID-19 has had on the medical system. But what we don't talk about enough is the impact that this has had on probably one of the most vulnerable populations, and that is those with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and the impact on the agencies that serve them. In preparing for this today, I talked to a few people, neighbors and so forth, giving social distance, and I explained what I was doing. And to a person, they said, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. And it never entered my mind. Didn't think about the impact it would have on those individuals. And that's the whole point. It's not in people's consciousness. People are not thinking about this. And recently, several of us had the opportunity to speak to the governor's office and the Department of Health, Dr. Levine. And we talked about all these issues, all the issues you've heard today from agencies and direct support professionals and so forth. And we were all in agreement. It's very self-evident. So everyone on the call said, these are critical services, and we have to recognize these agencies and the work that they do. There's no argument. But what was also evident to a lot of us is that after those calls, which happen quite often, people just go right back to what they do in their typical business day or the typical day and forget about these services one more time again. And that's part of, I think, the message for today. It's really reminding people and bringing it back to awareness, the importance of all these services, the importance of the work that the agencies and the DSPs are doing every day, and that we can't allow people to just simply forget that they are part of the system and they are impacted so terribly by COVID-19. So when the governor and the various departments and the budget office have their discussions about how will we fund things, how will we take some of the additional federal dollars, how are we going to create a budget for next year, we cannot allow agencies that serve these individuals to be left out of the equation. And that's really the critical point today, that as we talk about the crisis, there are a million different ways we can talk about it, but this is a population being served that is being impacted that we can't forget. So again, thank you so much for having me as part of this today. And you would have to tell me, am I trying to get back tomorrow?
Michael is back, I believe,
Okay.
Richard. So I think, yep, there we go. We got Michael. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Thank you, John. It would be hard to articulate it better than Gina and Marie did, but just to talk a little bit for a second about the value of a DSP. You couldn't ask for a more highly diversified skill set in a lower paying role. These are folks that are not just warm and caring, they are quick on their feet. They have to be mindful of impending disaster at all times, dealing with medically fragile and acutely behavioral folks. They are the ones mitigating all things negative when it comes to those they are serving directly, those they live with, the community at large, and themselves. And they're always putting themselves last. And this COVID environment in which we live, change isn't easy on any of us. But think about not having the resources to deal with that change within yourself. And that stress, that burden falls on our DSPs to support those we serve, and to do it well, to do it consistently. It's a true pressure cooker. It involves amazing consistency, cool, calm, and collected demeanor, and that is unusual for what we are paying and what we ask of them regularly. And providers know this. Providers have fronted the money in good faith. They know what these folks are worth, and we need the state to step up and realize what providers have known for a while. And even if you're not moved by any of that, it's a pure arithmetic analysis. You do not want the community system to fail. It will be so much more expensive to serve those that we currently are serving in state centers. Let's spend the money now so we don't have to spend a lot more money later. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mark.
Thank you, everybody. I just really appreciate folks chiming in. Before we get to question and answers, just some summary comments that I'd like to add. I think Marie and Gina and others did just really a fine job of describing the circumstances. Marie, my heart goes out to you. I can't imagine, when you're used to hugging and kissing your son like you do, and I've seen you together, to not have been able to do that for over a month, and how that must weigh heavy on your heart. And Gina, God bless you. Working 46 days in a row with doing some very intimate and personal care. DSPs help administer medication through and food through G and J tubes. They'll give subcutaneous insulin injections, help people with bathing, help people with dressing, help people with transferring out of bed into a mobility device, helping people with cooking and shopping and cleaning. And there is no social distancing in the work that we do. This is something that it's very intimate, very personal work. So, and the population that we do serve are among Pennsylvania's most vulnerable population. When you look at the studies showed that of people with intellectual disability or autism, that 82% have 2 or more additional chronic conditions. In addition to IDA, they've got 2 or more chronic conditions as defined by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And so these are chronic conditions that are serious neurological conditions, they're respiratory, et cetera, conditions of major systems. They're not like a chronic cough. These are very serious conditions. And we know that people with disabilities are at a higher risk of both of contracting COVID-19, but especially of significant complications, health complications that they do contract the virus. So we are looking forward to the governor and the legislature who have been working and understand our situation. Hopefully they're working out solutions for funding now. We need it now. Again, we are really running out of time, and hope that the legislature and the administration will make good on their promise to people with intellectual disability and autism, that will be there for them, and that they'll be there for them now. So at this point, I'll go ahead and again thank everybody for their presentation. We're going to open it up for questions and answers. So we'll go ahead and if some of the presenters want to come back on screen, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And just a quick reminder that folks can ask questions in 2 ways. You can either type the question into that question chat sort of dialog box there. It says questions in the control panel. You can type that in and we can read them out loud, or you can click the raise your hand button, and that way we can unmute you one at a time so you can ask your question out loud. So first, let me say a number of things here in the question box are not questions, but to you, Gina, they are people who are very appreciative for your dedication and everything that you do. So let me ask a question along those lines that actually is a question here for you, Gina. So it has to be difficult for you right now thinking about COVID-19 and the possibility that you might carry that virus, to to the folks you're working with, or to your family. And so, I mean, that's sort of, it's an added stressor. So the question is sort of how difficult is that, and having had to work so much right now, you know, that's got to be wearing on you obviously as well. So, I mean, you know, so I don't know if you want to just sort of talk to that
Sure.
reality right now.
I apologize. I didn't think this was going to hit me in the feels so much. So it is hard because I go to work at night and then, you know, do everything I have to do with the mask and keeping all the barriers so I keep everybody safe. And then, you know, I come home and I immediately take off my clothes. I have a designated box for my shoes and I take a shower. That way I know I'm not transmitting anything back and forth, because I don't want to get my family sick, because that's always a worry. Also, I have a 6-year-old at home and a 14-year-old at home, and I don't want to transfer anything back to work. So I go to work and I come home and I teach my kids, because now we're teachers also. So just constantly staying safe and just being mindful of what I'm doing, and just making sure I'm doing everything I can.
Thanks, Gina. This question is for the providers or provider organizations. Can somebody talk to maybe more examples of the additional costs that are incurred because of COVID-19 beyond what Tim had obviously mentioned earlier? Just you know, some more examples maybe.
Well, did you want to start, Tim?
I could elaborate on what some of the mitigation expenses that we've had done. We've been getting our houses professionally cleaned. You know, you've probably seen commercials where it sets off like a fogger and they go around and wipe everything down. We've been doing that twice a week, and that has really amounted to, it's probably well over $150,000. We've been doing that twice a week in every one of our locations. And as I mentioned, we have 105 group homes, community homes. We've been doing it in our offices as well. We have 4 different offices that we're doing that in, so that has added up. We were able to purchase some masks and some gowns, you know, that those kinds of things start to add up. And then, as I mentioned, we talked about we did an incentive payment to our staff to show our appreciation for what they're doing during this time. But that's been the bulk of it. And for an agency like us, we have a fairly large budget, but still that's very impactful for us to spend that kind of money in just a short period of time. We're talking a 6-week period of time just on this one occurrence that we've spent over $700,000.
Some other areas I think I can add, Tim, if I may, this is Mark, that there are not only the hero pay, where people are paying a little more for folks just to come to work, put their lives on the line every day to do this kind of work, but it's also some family members are saying to their loved one who is a DSP and say, look, you know, I love you. I know you love working with people with disabilities, but I can't put our family at risk with you coming in and out like this. And so we've got some DSPs that are actually staying in hotels. We have some DSPs that are staying in RVs. We've got DSPs that are staying, they're so committed to this that they're staying with a person who is COVID positive 24/7 for the 2-week self-quarantine period. And think about the toll that takes on the life of a DSP and on their family members. And then, and also think about the cost, right? You asked about the cost to the providers. We're talking about 128 hours a week of overtime that the staff is putting in and that the agency has to pay. So it's a tremendous cost both to the individual with a disability, to the DSP, and to the providers. We have a number of other costs from you know, all the other protective equipment. We've got additional recruitment costs because people are having to do higher sign-on bonuses now because they can't get anybody who wants to do this work right now. With the COVID-19 relief on unemployment, people can make more money on unemployment sometimes than they can getting a job as a DSP because the wages are too low. So we could go on and on, but there are a lot of significant additional costs.
Richard, were you going to jump in? I don't want to. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think some of the points I was going to make were made, but just to jump off on a couple of the things that Mark was saying, that early on in this discussion, there was a lot of talk about, well, how do we get more dollars to these agencies for these increased costs and for the DSPs? There's obviously dollars from the federal standpoint. An increased federal match is one piece for Medicaid services. There's CARES Act dollars. And actually, I've talked to some people in Washington about the situation, and they say, well, don't worry, we got Pennsylvania the money. Well, they may feel that Pennsylvania got the money, but I can guarantee you Tim and Gina and others on this call haven't gotten the check. And I think that's the disconnect, that it sounds good at one level, that, okay, good, there's some federal money coming in. Now it shifts to the governor, the governor's office, and others. What's being done with the money, and how can we start to make those right decisions to make sure that the agencies are funded? And money doesn't solve anything. But I think what you're hearing, from Tim and Mark and others, that there are some real hard costs here. And when you're hearing about the kind of work that Gina's doing and the situation with Marie's son, dollars may not solve everything, but at some point you have to address that part of the equation.
Thanks, Richard. So Marie mentioned this. Gina, you didn't mention it so much. I think you're, sort of you being maybe a little bit modest, but there are a number of questions here about pay for DSPs.
Okay.
So maybe to you, Gina, and I don't know, Marie, if you want to sort of follow up, because you talked about how it's important to you as a parent as well.
Yes.
But what would that what would that mean to you, Gina? Sort of increase in pay for DSPs, and for you, and for your coworkers also, and how you think about that, because obviously for you it's the work and the people that it shines through that you care about, but that you also have to make ends meet, right? You also have to.
Yes.
So you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I'm fortunate enough that I don't have to worry about daycare. Like I said, I work third shift, so my husband's home with our children, but there are a lot of my coworkers who are not working right now because they can't afford to pay their childcare. So they had to choose work or home with their kids. I mean, there's nobody to watch their kids. So now they have to forfeit their job. So now they have no income because of that. So if we had extra income for our workers, they could afford to pay daycare to come to work. And just giving us, a raise or however more income shows more appreciation for us, because we do a lot. There's so many hats we have to wear between making sure we're cooking healthy meals because they're not getting out and getting the proper exercise right now. They're not getting their physical therapy right now. They're not getting their social interaction. So that's messing with their mental alertness. We're constantly making sure we can do different activities. We've had cake decorating contests, within the homes. We've had a thing called a staycation where some of them dressed up in like Hawaiian outfits. We're constantly doing things to just try and make it easy. And so, like I said, we're wearing a million different hats, and it is very stressful. And I think to every DSP, any type of extra anything would just be amazing in a million different levels. And then I know I personally went out and bought extra clothes that I have, just specific work clothes and specific home clothes, so that I don't have to worry about, transmitting back and forth. And I have my work shoes and my home shoes, and that's all added cost. That's out of my pocket. That's not reimbursed or not anything. That's just something I did to make sure I could be extra, precautious.
I'm just amazed by, I forget who mentioned the hundreds of thousands of direct support professionals in America. And then you think of all those parents, so all of those parents have always known how essential DSPs are. And so essential is the big word now. And I've been on a panic thing for 29 years with my beautiful son. And now we are at a crisis. The entire earth is at a kind of a crisis. And they're still showing up for their not so good pay. And I thought that highly diversified skill set was spot on. The women who take care of my son, and men who take care of my son, are very creative, have to be very, very calm, because if they get riled up, my boy is bigger and stronger. So it's just amazing. And like I said, when Gina first started talking, all I thought about was her as a DSP. And then she mentions her beautiful family, and it's like, oh my God. So I've always wanted direct support professionals to make enough wage so that she can afford to put her children through college, and she'll stay in those homes with those beautiful adults who love her and those parents who really trust her. So I love this opportunity. Thank you.
So Marie, you alluded to this before, a question that I think it makes sense for you to start, but for others to jump in also. As a parent, what would your alternatives be if your provider closed?
So we already talked about that. My daughter said, no, Tony cannot come here. So I would go there. I would go live in the house with my son. And that's temporary. You know, I really don't know. I try to take things one day at a time. So I really don't know. I have a lot of faith in the agency my son is with. But if they would get ill, I would go stay there for sure, for sure.
I just like to add, I know a lot of our consumers don't have family. They don't have family members that come see them. They don't have family at all. So if our agency shuts down, where do they go? What do they do? Who takes care of them? Who worries about them? It's just, it's very scary to think about what would happen to those folks that don't have family if we lost our agency.
Right.
So this is probably a good one to wrap up on. We've had a couple of similar webinars like this for folks who are doing work across the state. So the question here is any insight from folks who are doing advocacy as to whether state legislators or the governor are hearing this message? Are they getting the message? Are they, willing to commit to anything? And maybe part B to that question is, what can folks do to help be effective advocates in this moment?
Do you want me to take that, Richard, or do you want to do it?
We can both. I could jump in first and turn it over to Mark. I think certainly people care, and people in the government care and are listening and understand the importance. I do also think that in a crisis such as this, there are a lot of competing factors. And I mentioned the dollars. Well, there's a lot of people looking for dollars, and rightly so. So I think it's, as advocates, we just have to make sure we are at the table and that the attention can't be diverted. And so that as decisions are made, as I said earlier, that certainly providers of these services and the DSPs and the agencies and so forth are part of that mix. And what I think people can do is reach out to their legislators. That it really is important, that letters and calls and so forth really do have an impact. And I know that's some of what Mark and I do every day, and Patrick, reach out to the government officials and so forth to keep that message out in front and keep the message consistent so that people are hearing it. And I think it does have an impact in the short run and then certainly over time. And Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think they are listening. I think there is quite a lot of noise out there right now. It's a cacophony. People are everybody's talking at the same time, but they're listening. We had a call with Senator Scarnati's office from the West, from your area this morning, and his staff was very appreciative of the information. And everybody we've talked to, from the governor's office to leadership in the House and the Senate, has been supportive. It's just a matter of how much money they have and how they're going to give it out. So I think Richard hit the nail on the head. The people we need to talk to are quite simply the leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor's office. And if you want to know how to contact them, I'm sure you can email Richard or email me. You can send one to me at par@par.net, and Richard can give his too. That we have the system in place where you can just point and click basically and send an email, do a phone call, and it'll go all to the right people. So people need to take action. We need to take action now. It's not something that we know that we can't wait much beyond next week. So in the legislative time, that's quick, right, Richard? I mean, that's quick. So we're looking at a week and a day maybe is what we have left to really influence the process. So if there ever was a time in our history where we needed to have additional funding and our system was at risk, it's now. And the time to call your legislator and the governor's office is now.
Mark, I would also add, we had a recent legislative forum. I certainly think there's interest on the part of legislators. Another thing that it seems like we have to do is educate legislators Our system is very different, so to just explain to them how money is not getting into the system, not getting into the right places. As I think Richard said, we're competing against a lot of other industries, but we're unique in many ways in terms of the capacity of the system, how money gets into the system initially. We're not even able to really draw that right now into supports. So I think the outreach, the education, and continuing to keep people engaged in the discussion.
There's one other piece with Patrick that you just reminded me of to remind the audience in terms of education, and that is that the providers that we're talking about, the agencies, are virtually 100% publicly funded. And that's important to remember. So the reason we're saying the funding from the government is so important is because there really is nowhere else to turn. It's not like these agencies can raise their prices or sell something else and that will offset losses. This is it. And this is how it's funded. And so when we talk about a crisis and increased costs, the only place to turn is back to the state and say, this is what's happening and we need help.
So, Michael, were you going to say something? You're on mute. No, we can't see you. There, wait. Nope. Okay. All right. Well, let me do this before I turn it back over to Mark. Let me just first thank everybody for getting on today and listening in. Let me thank our speakers. This is a difficult time, so we really appreciate you getting on, especially to Marie and to Gina. Thank you so much for telling us your stories. Gina, when we talk about frontline heroes right now, that's you. So thank you very much for all that you do.
Absolutely.
We'll have a recording of the webinar we'll send around to everybody. Feel free to share that. Let me do this. Let me turn it back to Mark just to wrap things up.
Again, I can't express strongly enough how grateful I am for Gina and Marie and others who came on, all of us to get together. One thing on what dovetail on what Patrick and Richard said is that we are about 100% Medicaid funded, and our rates are one of the components that drives the rates is the average pay of a DSP. And our rates, according to the state, are supposed to afford a $13 an hour wage, and we are able to somehow pay $13.20 on average. So we're doing a little bit better, but we have no control over that. So when you're talking with folks and they say, oh, providers can pay more, maybe other providers can, we can't, because both our expenses, our revenue and expenses are very tightly controlled by the state because we're so tightly regulated. They basically tell us how many people have to be with whom at what location at what time for how long, and then what they're going to pay us for that. It's very tightly managed by the state and the feds. The other thing is that we are the invisible profession. Gina, when you're in the community, you don't want people to see you. You want them to see the person you're with, right? You want that person with a disability to be the center of the show and to be integrating in the community, and we're in the background, which works most of the time, right? But most of the time that works. But now when we want people to know about us, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't think about that, because we're doing our job. We're the invisible profession. So now we can no longer be invisible, not during this time. I just encourage everybody, implore you, have your voices heard. Don't let this moment go by. Don't let this time in history go by without being vocal about your concerns about our profession. And again, thanks everybody for joining us.
Thank you.